Hi, everyone. We are now kind of entering the IRB process and the thesis process in this week of the class. And if you're listening to this lecture, and also really if you're enrolled in research methods, you are basically at the point where you are going to start working on either your thesis, your final project, or your visual comprehensive exam. And so what we have done in our program is we now offer three options to finish up your degree. So the first option is completing a traditional 5-chapter thesis. The second option is you can complete a final project. And then the third option, which is a new option that we've just recently introduced, is what we are calling a visual comprehensive exam. So let's sort of look at these, and then we'll also look at a chart that shows the difference. So the thesis basically, it is a research thesis, and it includes 5 chapters. 3 of these you worked on in design theory and research. So the first chapter is the introduction with the definition of terms. The second chapter is the literature review. The third chapter is the methods. The fourth chapter is the results. And then the fifth chapter is the discussion. And then with the thesis, you do have appendices. So if you can recall in this class, we're really zeroed in mostly on the methods, the results, and the discussion, where as in design theory and research, we really focused on the introduction, literature review, and the methods. So with the traditional research thesis, first of all, you will collect data with people, okay? Second is that a thesis does expand the body of knowledge. In other words, it moves the discipline forward because you are actually conducting a research study. And because you are collecting data with people, you must go through the IRB, or institutional review process, which we're going to also talk about in this lecture a little later on. So the final project is actually similar to a thesis. The first 3 chapters, you still have an introduction, you have a literature review, and you have a methods. But the difference with the final project really has to do more with the output. And the output with the final project tends to be more of a creative output. So it could, for example, be an exhibition. The final output could be in a video format. The final output could be maybe it's some kind of prototype design that you have come up with. Maybe the final output is perhaps it's some type of artwork or art installation that you have generated. And that's basically where the difference kind of comes into play. So the methods becomes a little bit different in a final project because you have to include a project plan of how this particular event, okay, or how this particular end product is happening. So if you were going to produce a video, what's the plan for producing that video? If you were going to have an exhibition, what's the plan for that exhibition to take place? How would you invite people to come to that exhibition? Where will the exhibition occur? So the results tend to be more visual in nature. So the results may actually be the final video that you're doing. Perhaps again, it's a final, again, I'm just sort of coming up with ideas. It could be the exhibition, could be the final prototyped item, could be something that you have designed that again is also kind of moving the field forward. The final project, though, does still require data collection with people, and you have to go through the IRB process. So the final project is a little bit different from the thesis, really, when we start looking at the results and the discussion sections. The visual comprehensive is 100% completely different from the 2 above, in that you can think of the visual comprehensive as basically like a final exam. It's a final exam. The output is more visual in nature, but it does not require data collection from people, and it also does not require IRB approval. It's basically a comprehensive exam with predetermined questions. So in this chart, you're going to see kind of a comparison between the three options that you have as a graduate student within our program. And you're going to see, first of all three of them do require 9 hours. Okay, so you would take 9 hours for each of these. You're going to also notice the format. And you're going to also notice that all three are considered to be rigorous. The thesis is definitely going to expand the body of knowledge, and so is the final project. The visual comprehensive doesn't necessarily do that because you are essentially answering predetermined questions that are given to you by your committee, but it does involve a very comprehensive, holistic, and very detailed knowledge of design thinking. For the thesis and the project, you're not going to have predetermined questions, but for the visual comprehensive, you would. And then again, you're going to see here where the thesis and the project require data collection with people, and where the visual comprehensive does not. It's more course reflection and synthesis. And then the other thing I think to notice here is that all three of these involve a committee. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But you're going to notice that with the thesis and the project, there's extensive involvement with the committee, but with the visual comprehensive, there is not. Okay, so what will happen is that once you are at the point where you're going to take thesis hours, you're going to form your committee. And when I say thesis hours, let me back up a little bit. I mean those 9 hours that you need to finish your degree. So those 9 hours could be used towards the thesis, towards the final project, or towards the visual comprehensive. So sometimes I will refer to it as thesis hours, but just know I mean all three of those, okay? You're going to form your committee first, and your committee is going to consist of a chair and two other committee members. So once you have that committee formed, and there's actually paperwork that's involved to do that, and as your advisor in the program, I send you that paperwork, and that then goes to the graduate school. So what you'll do is you're going to work with most closely with your committee chair. And again, you'll either be working on the final project, the thesis, or the visual comprehensive exam. And which one you should choose, just to be perfectly frank with you, I think it all depends on what your strengths are. And I also think it depends on what you want to do with this degree and how you want to use this particular degree. For the final project and for the thesis, there is more committee involvement. With the visual comprehensive exam, there is not. Okay, so I think that's really important to note. For the final project and the thesis, what you'll do is you will have a pre-proposal meeting. That's the first meeting you have with your entire committee. But you'll work with your chair. And what you do is you're going to work with your chair on a pre-proposal. The pre-proposal is going to consist of a draft of the introduction, a draft of the literature review, or it could be an outline of the literature review, and an outline or a draft of the methods section, of course, using design thinking strategies. Again, remember, those three sections are fairly similar for the final project and the thesis. There's a little bit of difference in terms of the methods for the two of those. Once you have that pre-proposal created, then you will have a meeting with your committee. Now, your chair is going to decide when you're going to do that meeting. That meeting is going to happen on Zoom. You're going to meet with your chair and your committee members. You'll send that pre-proposal to your committee, or your chair typically does. You usually give them, the chair and the committee, 2 weeks to review. The pre-proposal meeting is a very informal meeting. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. The proposal meeting is more formal. So you get the feedback from the pre-proposal meeting, and then you'll revamp the proposal. This is the first 3 chapters, and they're written in paragraph format. They're no longer in any kind of outline format. This is a much more formal meeting with your committee, and you will do a verbal presentation during the proposal meeting. And then the committee basically approves your proposal. Once you have done this, once your proposal has been approved by your committee, it's called defending your proposal. That's when you can go through the Institutional Review Board or Human Subjects Review process. Okay. And then last, remember the visual comprehensive involves minimal committee involvement. You really pretty much work on your own with the questions that you have received. You can certainly get feedback from your chair, but this is a more individual sort of endeavor. So let's look at the pre-proposal in a little more detail. You work with your chair. It's a draft, again, of your introduction, literature review, and methods. Sometimes the methods are in an outline format, sometimes they're not. Once approved by your chair is going to send the pre-proposal to the committee members. And again, I think it's really important for you to know that you give those committee members at least 2 weeks to review, okay? Then you'll schedule a pre-proposal meeting. This is a very informal meeting, okay? You'll meet with the committee members. You'll receive feedback on the pre-proposal from your committee members. You're going to then take that feedback and continue to work on the proposal. So this next slide is just showing you like an outline method that you could use for the methods in the pre-proposal. You're going to see like, here's the method, a description, and the purpose. In other words, why this individual is kind of using this particular method. And this could potentially work for the pre-proposal meeting. So after the pre-proposal meeting, then you're going to go back, okay, and you're going to work on any corrections that you need for the proposal. And again, you'll continue to work with your chair. So the proposal, again, is going to consist of the introduction, the definition of terms, the literature review, the methods, and you have to, at this point, have the appendices. And the appendices is going to include all of your instruments, all of your consent forms, any recruitment you might have, any email correspondence you might have with your subjects, and a reference list. Once the proposal is more finalized, the chair again will send it out to the committee. You give the committee 2 weeks to review, and then you will defend your proposal. This is a more formal presentation. It's a verbal presentation done on Zoom. Most of our students use PowerPoint to do that presentation. Once the proposal is approved by the committee, then you have successfully defended your proposal, and then you can begin the IRB process. Okay, so let's just kind of review. We have pre-proposal. Okay, you'll work on the pre-proposal with your chair. This is a much more informal process that allows you to get feedback from your committee members a little earlier in the process. Okay. Once you get that feedback, you work on your more formal proposal. You then defend your proposal. Once you have successfully defended your proposal, then you can begin work on the IRB process. Okay, so basically the IRB process is a application that you submit to Radford University. And this is for human subjects approval or compliance through Radford University. And so the way this works is basically we use a program called IRB Manager, and this is available through one campus. And you're going to put together an application that you are going to submit through IRB Manager. You're going to work with your chair as you do this. And then you basically wait to receive IRB approval from Radford University. Once you receive that IRB approval, then you can start collecting data on human subjects. And so we're going to kind of walk through this IRB process. The first thing I think to note is that you have to do human subjects training, and all of you should have done that, but you're going to have to look to see when you did that training and if it's still good. So all of you did the training in design theory and research, and your certificate lasts for 3 years. What you need to do is go and check, because some of you may need to renew that certificate. But you have to do human subjects training. So here you're going to see where that human subjects training is available. And if you ever want to look at the IRB process, all you have to do is you go to the Radford University website, search IRB. It will take you to the IRB site through Radford University. Radford University uses city training. And so if you go to the IRB website, you're going to see a link to human subjects training, and it will take you, okay, to the training requirements, and then it will then take you to the city training that is necessary for you to complete. And the training that you are interested in, you have to do training requirements for faculty and staff researchers because you are a researcher, okay? So it's really important that you do the correct training, and the training is social and behavioral research only. That's the training that you want to do. All of you have done this. You did this in design theory and research, but remember, the training only lasts for 3 years, so you may need to redo it. Okay, so once you have completed your training, then the next thing that I usually do, I recommend that my students create a folder on their computer. I know this sounds kind of silly, but you're going to need to keep all this IRB material together. And so I always create a folder. I label it IRB for the particular research study, and I keep all of that information together because you are going to have to gather quite a bit of information prior to submitting the application through IRB Manager. Okay. So again, we use IRB Manager. IRB Manager is accessed through MyRU or My Campus, okay? So you're going to go to My Campus, and if you search IRB Manager, you will find it. There is IRB Manager training that's available through Desire to Learn. There's also a training manual, and I have that posted on D2L. So you're going to see that training manual. But typically what happens is before you submit your application through IRB Manager, you're going to work on the application with your chair. You're going to get all your materials together. You're going to work on that application with the chair, and then you're going to submit it to IRB Manager. That is really the best way to do it. Okay, so again, you're going to work on that initial application with your chair, and your chair will send this to you. The other thing, too, is we're going to actually work on this application in this class. Okay. And so you're going to get a sense of how you're going to put this application together. Okay. We're going to do sort of a rough kind of application in this class. It won't be the complete thorough application, but it will at least give you an idea, okay, of how you put this thing together. Okay. And then you'll work on that again with your chair. When you get ready to go into IRB Manager, the key here, this is really important, is you need to make your chair a collaborator. Because when you put your information into IRB Manager, you make your chair of your thesis committee or your final project a collaborator. That way they can go into the IRB Manager and they can make changes. They can make corrections, any corrections that are needed. Okay. Probably one of the biggest pointers that I can give you here is when you are writing your IRB application, you are writing this, again, I cannot emphasize this enough, for somebody who knows nothing about your project and who knows nothing about design thinking. The person who's going to read your IRB application is looking at this through the lens of human subject protection, human subject ethics, okay? So they're looking to see, are you treating your human subjects ethically? Are you treating them fairly? What touch points are you having with your human subjects? That's the lens that they're going to be looking at this through. And you're going to get somebody, the person now who is reviewing a lot of the IRB applications at Radford University is in nursing. So this is somebody, again, they don't know anything about your study. They don't know anything about design thinking. So you're going to have to explain this in a very clear, concise, and consistent manner. This is incredibly important. So you are writing this from the subject's perspective. And what I mean by that is you are writing this in terms of when are you in contact with that subject? What are you asking subjects to do? Okay. And that has to be very clearly and explicitly explained. Remember, the goal of the IRB, they want to protect subjects. That's really their goal. Okay. All right. So when you first go into the IRB or IRB Manager, okay, They're going to ask you who the researchers are for the study. And what they're going to want to know, first of all, is who is the principal investigator, and then who are the additional researchers. The principal investigator has to be the chair of your committee. The chair of the committee is the principal investigator. You are the student researcher. That's very important. It's very important that you do that correctly. Okay. The other thing is that the IRB manager is also going to ask you for your chair's vita, and it's also going to ask you how your chair is qualified, okay, to do this research study. That's why you're going to work very closely with your chair when you put this application together. And that's why you want to make your chair a collaborator on the IRB application, because your chair is going to help you then. They're going to probably put their qualifications in. Your chair will then be able to upload their vita to the IRB manager. The other thing that's going to happen is that the IRB manager may ask you also as well which category your research will fall into. Again, one thing I want to reiterate in this lecture is that the IRB manager, the application does change, okay? It changes from time to time. You are going to get a sense of what this application is like, but don't be surprised when you go into IRB Manager. If the application is slightly different from what we do in this class, don't be surprised by that. Again, my goal is to give you an overview of this process. It's to give you an idea of what this process entails, but you will work more individually with your committee chair, okay, when it comes time to getting your IRB approval. But there's a couple of things that to keep in mind. First of all, you have 3 different categories, okay, of human subjects review. Exempt is when it doesn't need to be reviewed. This is when there's research that has very minimal risk. And this would typically be, let's say you're doing a very standard questionnaire with subjects, then your research might be exempt. I will tell you that the majority of the studies that our students conduct are not exempt. They're almost always expedited. And the reason why our studies are expedited is because if you plan on audio recording or audio and video recording your subjects, then you fall into this expedited category. And our students almost always audio and video record. And the reason why we audio and video record is because we might be doing qualitative interviews with our subjects via Zoom. And we want to record that, okay? Because we have to go back in and analyze that data. If we are doing a Zoom workshop, okay, using design thinking strategies with our subjects, we're going to record that probably because again, we want to go back in and listen to that workshop. So we are almost always expedited. Our studies typically are minimal risk. But because we're recording, we fall into the expedited category, which means that our project will go out for IRB review. A full IRB board review are projects that are more than minimal risk. I can tell you that I've been at Radford now I've been at Radford since the inception of our graduate program for 14 years. Actually, I've been at Radford for 21 years. In the 14 years I've been working with graduate students, I've only had one who went through a full IRB review. So the bottom line is our projects almost never fall into this more than minimal risk, okay? Very rarely. So we are almost always expedited, I think is the important thing to note here. Okay, so one thing that the IRB application is almost always going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to describe the study, okay? They're going to want to know what is the study. They're also going to want to know, they're going to want you to describe the study from the perspective of the subject, from the start of the study to the very end of the study. And I'm showing you some examples here. I will tell you that what I'm showing you here, this application here, the formatting of that, like what it looks like graphically, has changed a little bit in IRB, but they will ask some of the very similar questions, okay? So what you have to be really careful with is when they're asking you explain the study from the start to the end. You have to be able to talk about, again, every time you contact those participants, okay? So what they want to know is, for example, let's say that you are going to do interviews with your participants, okay? And you're going to use Zoom, all right? So first of all, the IRB wants to know, who are your participants? Who exactly is participating in this study and why? Is there a certain age that is required to participate in this study? Is it males and females? Are there race parameters? Are you using a purposive studying, a purposive sampling technique, a convenience sampling technique? Where exactly are you drawing this sample from? They're going to want to know, how are you recruiting these participants? So the reason for that, again, is because you're interacting with people. How are you doing this? Are you going to send your participants an email recruitment? And then maybe they email you back if they're interested? Are you going to post flyers on social media? If you're going to do that, then you have to show an example of the flyer. If you're going to email your subjects, then you have to show an example of the email you're sending to your subjects. So again, how are you recruiting? That would be number one. And then you would show examples of all the recruitment pieces that you're using. Let's go back to the interviewing. You're going to be doing qualitative interviews. Next, okay, but the IRB wants to see those interview questions. What exactly are you asking your participants? How many interview questions are they? Did you generate the interview questions? We need to see those interview questions, okay? How much time does the participant need to give for the study? So let's say you're going to interview people and you think it's going to take about 30 to 40 minutes for the interviews. You have to state that, okay? How does the participant know if you're doing these interviews via Zoom, you're going to send them a Zoom link. So how is it scheduled? What time? What date? Okay. If you were doing your interviews in person, then the IRB would want to know, how does the person know where the location is for the interview? Where do they go? Okay. So again, this is the level of detail that is needed in the IRB applications. Very important. The other thing too is, again, we're going back to our example on interviewing. How is consent happening? So for example, if I'm going to interview my participants via Zoom, okay, how am I doing consent? Am I emailing the consent form to them? Then they're going to sign it and email it back. How exactly does that occur? Okay. Um, Again, so you're going to see here how this is laying out exactly, okay, how the study works from start to finish, okay? So in this case, let's say you're doing a design thinking workshop, okay? Again, you've got to explain that workshop. You can't just say, and then the participants will complete a bullseye diagramming, okay, or experience diagramming. You can't say that, because remember that the person who is reading this application does not know what an experience diagram is, nor do they know what a bullseye diagram is. You have to explain those design thinking strategies. It's really important that you explain in detail exactly what your participants are doing in the workshop. So it might happen, maybe the workshop is online. So the participants come into the workshop, they come into Zoom. And maybe you're going to welcome them. You're going to ask them if they had any questions about the consent, because maybe you sent the consent form to them ahead of time via email, excuse me. Okay. Then you tell the participants you are going to have them participate in a brainstorming exercise, let's say, using sticky notes. And they're going to, whatever, jot down all these ideas related to ba 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 ba. Okay. And you're going to give them, let's say, 5 minutes to do that. Okay. You have to explain that. All right. Then maybe you're going to have the participants cluster those sticky notes, and maybe you're going to help them. Okay. Into themes. You have to explain that. So hopefully this makes sense. You've got to be able to explain what these design thinking strategies are to somebody who knows nothing about them. The other thing is you're going to include the templates in the IRB application. So if you're going to use bullseye diagramming, you need to have that template as part of your IRB application. Consent forms. You have to get consent to participate in this study. And first of all, your consent forms have to be on Radford University letterhead. The beginning of the consent form has to state that the participants are participating in a research study. And the consent form has to talk about what exactly participants are doing and how long they are expected to do it. Okay. So you have to describe exactly what people are going to do, if it's a workshop, if it's interviews, if it's a survey, etc. Again, consent form. Here you've got to describe, here you can see this person in their consent form, they put the actual workshop agenda in the consent form with the times, okay? They listed out all of the design thinking strategies, okay? And and then in the consent form, they're going to explain exactly what these strategies are. So participants then, completed a bullseye diagram. In the bullseye diagram, they did ba 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 ba. Then they moved into statement starters and they took maybe the most important ideas in the center of the bullseye diagram and they reframed those statements into statement starters. Again, you've got to explain what a statement starter is, okay? Then you're going to notice in the consent form, you have to explain what the risk is. Okay. And the other thing too is you always have to explain in the consent form if you are photographing your participants or if you are recording your participants. Now, one thing that's really nice is that the IRB at Radford University does have examples of consent forms, and I've posted those on D2L. So you don't have to start from scratch. They have a consent form. You can merely use the consent form and then fill in, okay, parts that are relevant for your particular study. So they do have consent form templates, which is excellent, okay? One thing you want to be really careful about, we sort of talked about this before with the IRB application, is consistency. So, for example, here you're going to say that the student researcher here is saying that the bullseye diagramming exercise is going to take, it looks like 40 minutes. You want to make sure that you are consistent from the consent form to the IRB application, because that a lot of times is where I start to see problems, where a student will say, the bullseye diagramming is going to take 20 minutes, but then in the consent form, they say it's going to take 15 minutes. Okay. I'm going to tell you right now that the IRB reviewer will catch that immediately. So any discrepancies, you can't have that. You have to have 100% consistency. So you have to be incredibly detail oriented in your IRB application. It's really important. Uh, so the other thing you're going to notice too with consent forms is that you're going to see that the study is voluntary. Again, a lot of this language is already in the consent form, and you just need to change the verbiage to fit your particular study. In other words, the idea here is that subjects can withdraw, and they can withdraw without penalty. Okay. And then you also include your contact information as the student researcher. Remember, you are the student researcher. Your chair is the principal investigator. The one thing to notice is that you cannot include your phone number. Student researchers are not allowed to include phone numbers. I believe principal investigators are, which is the chair, but not student investigators. Okay. So hopefully this is kind of giving you an overview of the IRB process and also the thesis process. You are going to prepare an IRB application, okay? I'm going to help you with the preparation of that IRB application, but just know that this is, again, sort of preparing you for when you begin work on your thesis with your chair. When you start doing that thesis, that final project, you will work very closely with your chair on the IRB application. This is just giving you an idea, okay, of how you will put that application together. If you have any questions or concerns, by all means, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. and I'm more than willing to help you out, with any questions that you might have with the application.